My name is Zainab. My name is Zainab, and we at CCMW are delighted to have all of you join us. We'll begin with the recitation of Quran and its English translation, followed by a line acknowledgement. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Ameen. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise is for Allah, Lord of the worlds, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Master of the day of judgment, you alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us along the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not those you are displeased with, or those who are astray. I would like to acknowledge that this land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Piton First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory was a subject of the Dishwood One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to any who may be here with us today, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Miigwech. I also want to share that this webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be available on our YouTube and website. We invite your comments and questions, and we'll run a live Q&A session at the end of the seminar using the chat box and Q&A box functions. Lastly, a post-event survey will be emailed to you later today. It will take about 2 minutes to complete, and it will help us improve our future programs and events. I'm now going to pass over the mic to our Executive Director, Nazat Jaffrey, to tell us more about the series and introduce our esteemed speaker for tonight.
Thank you, Zainab, and welcome everyone. Thank you for giving up one of your evenings and joining us for this really interesting webinar. So today you're joining us for our webinar entitled From Controversies to Conversations, Muslim Women in Contemporary North America. And the scholar that we're featuring this evening is Dr. Mina Sharify-Funk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we started these Muslim Scholar series. Basically, we wanted to showcase the work of Muslim women scholars here in Canada, and especially those who are doing work about Muslim women, and open people's minds. People are so misinformed about Muslim women, about Islam, and we wanted to promote critical thinking amongst Muslims and non-Muslims about who we are, and also get educated in the process. So our guest speaker this evening is Dr. Sharify-Funk, and she's written and presented a number of articles and papers on women and Islam, Islamic and Sufism hermeneutics, and the role of cultural and religious factors and peacemaking. She's author of 2 books, Muslim Women in Contemporary North America, Controversies, Clichés, and Conversations, which was published this year, and Encountering the Transnational Women, Islam, and the Politics of Interpretation, published in 2008. She has also co-authored 2 books, Contemporary Sufism, Piety, Politics, and Popular Culture, and Unveiling Sufism, From Manhattan to Mecca, and has co-edited 3 books, Cultural Diversity in Islam, and Abdulaziz Said, a pioneer in peace, intercultural dialogue, and cooperative global politics. So I'd like to pass on the mic now to Dr. Sharify-Funk. Welcome, Mina.
Assalamu alaikum. Yahoo, Nushat. It's hard to follow you. What a beautiful soul. And Zainab, I bow. Thank you for hosting me. And all of the representatives of CCMW, thank you for all that you are and do. It is an honor to be with such brilliant souls, minds, hearts. And I do want to offer gratitude to souls that you might not know that are behind the scenes to this event. So I mentioned Zainab, I mentioned Nushat, but there's also Nina and Iman and Zuleika and Sabrine. Thank you so much for your beautiful support in organizing and getting the word out for this event. And from my Shirazi heart, I have to start there. Thank everyone. I thank everyone for coming tonight. For those of you in Canada, I wish you all a beautiful and lovely, peaceful Thanksgiving long weekend. So it's very kind of you to come tonight before that. So let's begin. And to begin, I just want to mention the genesis of my latest book, Muslim Women in Contemporary North America, Controversies, Cliches, and Conversations. Comes, and I'm going to get my slideshow up here, comes from being a university professor for close to 20 years and teaching a variety of graduate and undergraduate courses on Islam, courses like contemporary Islamic thought and identity, gender and Islam, and the religious heritage of Islam. So many different courses over 20 years about Islam. And this book that you see on the screen is, you could say, a reflection of experiencing, teaching about Islam and Muslims, and in particular, of course, Muslim women. Like many of my colleagues, and I wish I could see all of you, who teach courses connected to Islam and Muslims, I think you can relate that in our North American university classes, there is such great diversity of Muslims and non-Muslim students. And the worldviews in the classroom can diverge quite profoundly because they reflect, of course, a cross-section of the diversity present in North America. And over the years, what I found was that many students seemed to want to know my opinion as a professor about these controversies connected to Muslims that were continually emerging in our shared social contexts. And of course, these controversies change a bit from year to year, but with continuity in many of the themes. Now, as a person trained in peace and conflict resolution, as well as in Islamic studies, I realized that the problems in our social milieu were reflected in the classroom. And I decided that this was a very special opportunity to nurture dialogue. And of course, dialogue is greatly needed for understanding the broader society within the classroom setting. Now, in peace studies, as well as, in my opinion, the best of the Islamic intellectual tradition, there is a recognition that the presence of multiple perspectives is not a problem, provided that there is a certain adab or ethic through which we hear out and evaluate the various perspectives. There is a recognition in both process and content. So I decided that as a professor, instead of just telling my students what to think about each controversy, or about whatever voice was loudest at a particular time, I have the opportunity to try to teach these diverse students a way of engaging one another and the world around them. And in doing so, from my perspective, you really do help students nurture conversation about the problem of what I call, quote, too many singular narratives, end quote, which really can help them to understand the complexity of controversies and ultimately the repressive nature of such controversies. Additionally, when teaching students, I try to encourage them to not settle on the first book or reading they find, even if it seems to answer a singular question in their minds about what's going on or what's going wrong. Rather, I encourage them to be curious about multiple perspectives and the experiences from which these perspectives emerge, so that each one of them can piece together a more nuanced, complex, and well-informed understanding. So, having said that, for me, education involves both deduction and induction, as well as discovery, rather than just acquiescence to a singular point of view. And in my 20 or so years of teaching, this approach encourages habits of critical engagement and dialogue and debate, as well as empathy. In my own experience, this approach also sheds light on the diversity of identity and understandings in the classroom, which can allow for some great and probably the best times, I would have to say, in my teaching moments. Great learning moments can occur. So a big part of my motivation for writing this book on Muslim women in contemporary North America was to help my students understand some controversial case studies and illustrations through a basically inductive approach in which dialogue and a search for complex understanding are the core principles. Now, to help you understand the book more, I hope to, in the next 30 minutes, briefly share an overview of each chapter, and then I'd like to read a little bit from it, and it would be lovely then to have a Q&A and discussion. So since the theme of diversity is so central to this book, chapter 1 starts by mapping the demographics of the diversity among Muslim women in contemporary North America, including both Canada and the United States. Ultimately, it helps students to understand the varied ways in which Muslim women from different ethnic, cultural, sectarian, or interpretive contexts seek sacred meaning and unity. And with this in mind, with what I just said, I would like each person on this Zoom meeting to just take a moment to think about the diversity of Muslim women here and now. And if you identify as a Muslim woman, it is also important to take a moment and think about the influences that have defined your selfhood, whether it is ethnicity, culture, nationality, sectarian and/or interpretive understandings. So many different factors, of course, making you. Yeah, that's where chapter 1 comes in, trying to help paint a picture of that diversity, which of course I can't really do, but I do try. So in setting out to map the diversity of Muslims in Canada and America, I do want to say that my book does not equate these contexts. It does, however, recognize patterns of similarity, connection, and mutual influence, including ways in which Muslim women living in both countries are navigating and negotiating divisive issues connected to, but not limited, Islamophobia, identity and cultural politics, as well as what it means to live in liberal, democratic states in which Muslim women are often visible, racialized, as well as are religious minorities. My students have mentioned that they appreciate this chapter because it gives them, you could say, a lay of the two lands and contextualizes issues shaping Muslim women in the 21st century North America. In chapter 2, I offer my overall framework for the investigation of case studies that follows. In it, I try to give voice to scholars who focus on the necessity of the dialogical in a world full of great ideological contradictions and divisive politics. I explore the thought of scholars like Roxanne Ubin and Abdul Aziz Said. The latter of these two, Abdul Aziz Said, was a Syrian-American pioneer in Islamic peace studies, and I had the honor of him being my PhD supervisor. I also had the honor of being the co-editor of a book that has also recently been published. And I know sometimes it's crazy to come out with two projects at the same time, but really these projects in the last 5 to 8 years have been in tandem with one another. So the title of the book on the screen is Abdul Aziz Said, a pioneer in peace, intercultural dialogue, and cooperative global politics. And in this book, we try to cover his life, thought, scholarship, as well as activism. Now, real briefly, I just want to share some quotes from Dr. Said, and that can give you a feel for how I was trained in the dialogical and also trained as a scholar in peace and conflict resolution and Islamic studies. So Professor Said, these are quotes from him. Quote, "The whole world needs the whole world." End quote. Another, "The whole is reflected in its diverse parts, and from its parts, the information of the whole community can be constructed. The total is greater than the parts, but only when the parts are taken into account." End quote. Another quote, "When we empathize with each other, we discover that human life or the human predicament is so similar in its deeper significance and issues, whatever our society, religion, culture, or gender. When we begin to empathize, when we begin to empathize, we also start to learn the patterns of human connection." And this is the last quote. "We have moved from a humanity that experienced its collective life as fragments of the whole to a humanity that must experience itself as a whole. A humanity that must come to terms with realities of interdependence in all spheres of life." If you'd like to know more about this book, feel free to ask questions during the Q&A. I'm going to continue to talk about the other. Now, it was Professor Said who introduced me to the thought and example of Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, a 13th century Islamic philosopher and beautiful metaphysician. And so in the second chapter of my book on Muslim women in contemporary North America, I also tap into the thought of Ibn al-Arabi and particularly look at his idea of complementary contradictions. What is complementary contradictions? It is a way of looking at conflicts, disagreements, and diverse controversies of the world that does not allow any singular point of view to assert finality and totality, even while affirming that there are underlying truths in which we all participate and which are accessible to investigation from our different starting points and positionalities. If you'd like me to talk more about the dialogical and how I apply the dialogical to my case studies, feel free to ask so in the discussion period. But I'm going to continue on. So for chapter 3, I begin my case studies. In it, I analyze and undergo a critical investigation of what I call clash literature, which has influenced a growing Islamophobia industry in Canada, America, and beyond. And there are some examples of this literature on this screen. This is a genre of post-9/11 writings that popularize and even amplify elements of Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations thesis. And in these writings, there is a particular reference to putative threats posed to Western civilization by Islam and Muslims. So in this chapter, I point out, examine, and critically analyze cross-cutting themes from these ultra-controversial books, which have become popular and influential. Some are best-selling in North America. The end of this chapter, I argue for the necessity of the dialogical, especially in the context of a variety of very problematic issues and themes found in these books. And it is interesting to note that after assigning this chapter in my university courses, many of my students have pointed out that we all have been influenced, at least in part, by some of the ideas in these books, even if we have never read them. And that examining them comparatively actually makes these books less attractive and influential. So this chapter can initiate an important comparative analysis and conversations about very problematic issues and themes found in this genre. And I'm just going to briefly summarize some of those problematic themes. One thing found in these books, there is a stark worldview that is presented in these books, that Western liberalism is locked in a dangerous conflict with Islamic authoritarianism. Another thing, the authors of these books ultimately judged that there is an absence of genuinely moderate, progressive, conciliatory, peaceful tendencies within the global Muslim community. Instead, you find in these books the tendency to homogenize and essentialize all Muslims with no acknowledgement or knowledge of the diversity of Muslims. Another theme, clash thinkers of these books place strong emphasis on, quote, threatening demographic trends associated with Muslim immigration to the West, and the resistance by Muslims to assimilate to Western values. Some also argue that these trends have been made possible by a loss of faith in the Judeo-Christian tradition, with no acknowledgement of Islam's Abrahamic legacy. Another thing found in these books, they like to point out the problem of pervasive political correctness and multiculturalist sensitivities in the West. A lot of authors in these books point out that the West is in a crisis because of its intellectuals. And then the last thing that I'd like to just point out, and that I critically analyze, is the theme of women's emancipation as one of the most fundamental wedge issues between Islam and the West, which has fed into the development of diverse controversial issues and the influence of dissident Muslim public spokeswomen. So chapter 3 really flows into chapter 4. In that, in chapter 4, I look at another distinct genre of writing, which is very influential within the North American context, and in some cases overlaps the clash literature. And it has been referred to as a literature by authors whom I call dissident Muslim women. And on this slide are some books in this genre that are analyzed in this chapter. And I want to say this is a very complex subject area. And for the purposes of this presentation, I would like to make 3 very simple observations about it. 1, many of the women who write in this genre have suffered and have been victimized in some way. 2, many of their books have made bestseller lists in North America. And 3, they have often been critiqued for reinforcing very harmful stereotypes and cliches about Islam and Muslims, in effect for equating their own experiences with everyone else's experience. In sum, this chapter helps the reader compare some common themes as well as points of differences among these authors, and examines their discourses about Muslim reform, their positions in relation to Western liberalism and secularism, and their understanding of women's emancipation. At the end of the chapter, I offer a nice chart, and the students have appreciated that summarizes key dissident Muslim women and their diverse understandings as taken from their books. In chapter 5, I explore a very different type of controversy, involving a variety of perspectives within North American Muslim communities and a very attentive media environment. In particular, the controversy concerns Muslim women's prayer leadership, the role of gender in Muslim sacred spaces, and an emerging phenomenon which has been called by members within it an Islamic feminist movement of North America and beyond. So this chapter takes note of ways in which a push by Islamic feminists to make more space for women in prayer leadership has served both to generate controversy and also to start some new conversations, especially about gendered sacred spaces. The chapter concludes by exploring and comparing the development of women-friendly mosques, women-only mosques, and gender-inclusive mosques in Canada and America, and how these spaces are differing when redefining the roles of women, as well as in creating new, safe, sacred spaces that seek to actively include queer Muslims in which anyone can serve as a prayer leader. On this slide are some images from news outlets connected to controversies in this chapter. In the left-hand corner, top corner, you have what some scholars call the Wadud prayer of 2005, which sparked a variety of Muslim women-led prayers in North America. As a response, you have mainstream Muslim advocacy organizations like ISNA promoting and distributing a booklet entitled, quote, "Women-Friendly Mosques and Community Centers Working to Reclaim Our Heritage," end quote, which is the front cover of it, of the booklet, is in the middle of the screen. You also have images of the Women's Mosque of America, established in 2015, and the Toronto Unity Mosque, founded in 2009. Chapter 6 explores Canadian and American controversies that involve veils and veiling. Many of you are already familiar with the trajectory of events in Quebec, and I end my chapter on that. But for this presentation, I wanted to share that I find it fascinating that some other controversies involving hijab bans in sports are so much less well known. And on this slide are images of North American Muslim women who have been affected by hijab bans. Now, in describing these hijab bans, which have impacted North American Muslim women's participation in soccer, basketball, boxing, cross-country running, triathlon, martial arts, and weightlifting, I focus not only just on the efforts by national and international sports governing bodies to prevent hijab-wearing women from participating, but also on ways in which activism on behalf of these women has led to the repeal of restrictive rules and regulations and to the development of Muslim women's sports associations and movements. So I'd like to share 2 examples of hijab bans in the last 2 decades. In February 2007, member of the Ottawa soccer team, Napin Haspors, Asmahan, Mansour, was ejected from a soccer tournament in Laval, Quebec, because her hijab allegedly posed a safety risk. Although she had played in Ontario and in 2 previous games in the same tournament without any instructions to remove her hijab. In response, her team, along with 4 other teams, quit the tournament in protest. Controversy ensued as to whether the decision to eject Mansour from the tournament was a result of racial religious profiling or whether a safety threat was actually posed by the headscarf. The issue was sent to the Canadian Soccer Association and FIFA, the International Federation of Association Football, and a policy was created to ban head coverings in soccer globally due to the potential danger of injury and harm. The 2 rules in the FIFA rulebook that were reinforced were, quote, advertising on equipment. Basic compulsory equipment must not have any political, religious, or personal statement. And safety. A player must not use equipment or wear anything that is dangerous to himself or another player. In October 2012, 5 years later, as a response to various controversies and campaigns against FIFA's hijab ban, a Montreal designer, Ilham Sayed Javed, co-founder of Resports On, was one of the 2 designers whose Muslim veil design was approved by FIFA as it it adhered to the criteria set out by the board. Unfortunately, it would take 2 more years for FIFA to finally lift its hijab ban in 2014. That's 7 years of a hijab ban by the largest international organization for soccer. This lifting would influence a variety of multinational athletic sporting corporations like Nike and Adidas, and a lot of us wear this clothing, to promote sports as belonging to everyone and to create their own versions of the soccer hijab. Now it's become a huge market. What's interesting is, ironically, in 2014, as FIFA's ban was being lifted, another major hijab ban in women's sports would be created by FIBA, the International Basketball Federation. Similar to FIFA, the ban was to prevent any injuries associated with a headscarf, but it also was to promote a religiously neutral environment. As stated by FIBA's communications coordinator, Simon Wilkinson, quote, FIBA's rules and regulations apply on a global scale and make no distinction between various religions, end quote. And that was in 2018. The creation of this ban, too, had a trajectory of different events. The most well-known story was of Bilqis Abdul Qadir, and an image of her is in the middle top of the screen. Bilqis was the first NCAA Division I athlete to wear the hijab, and she still holds since 2022 the high school record of scoring in Massachusetts. Bilqis was told in 2014 that she could not play in the WNBA due to the FIBA's hijab ban. In 2017, after 3 years of petitioning, Bilqis and Indira Kahlo, former college point guard for Tulane University, helped to overturn the ban. And Bilqis would start a really beautiful campaign called Muslim Girls Hoop 2. She also started another one, Dribbling Down Barriers, which is a program that facilitates play between Muslim and non-Muslim athletes to get people of different faiths to be comfortable with each other. Bilqis would also be in a documentary, Life Without Basketball, that would come out in 2019. Kahlo became the president of Global Athletics, a not-for-profit organization that aims to get women and girls active across the world. And she also, in 2017, helped to establish Muslim Women in Sport Network. Now, in the conclusion of my book, I point out that there is a dire need for more scholarship on these hijab bans and telling the stories of these women. And I want to plead to CCMW to be wonderful if we could do a project that tries to capture the stories of all these women across different sports. And I just want to say, before going on to the next slide, just ask yourself, how many of you know the stories of these individual Muslim women who are really champions in their sports? Now, all of these different cases and areas of investigation involve complexities, and it is not possible for me to involve every issue area worthy of analysis and critique in my presentation today. That would be impossible. I would like, however, to share a few takeaway points about overarching lessons. And I hope you don't mind if I read from my book so you get a taste for it. So I'm going to just share 7 points to take away, and then I'll read. So the first point, ideas cross borders. And for all the differences between the United States and Canada, there are also some very similar tropes assumptions, and cliches in play. 2, exclusionary and stereotypical ideas have repressive consequences and can impact the minds of people who have only been exposed to them indirectly, because these ideas contribute to an atmosphere of distrust, suspicion, fear, anxiety, scrutiny. 3, context matters. And of course, Quebec is unique in certain respects. Yet, there appear to be correlations between different types of efforts to regulate Muslim women's religious and cultural expression. For example, between attempts to take veils out of public sector occupations on the one hand, and out of sports on the other. 4, controversies among Muslims often echo loudly in North American media environments, adding complexity to internal negotiations among Muslims. The impact that media has on the formation of Muslim communities is beyond what we can actually summarize. 5, even while non-Muslims need to refrain from assuming the narratives of dissident Muslim women as representative, Muslim communities should not be averse to cultivating more robustly diverse and actively inclusive internal conversations about the intersections of gender, race, sectarian differences, and ethnicity. 6, the environment experienced by Muslim women in North America is far from static, with worrying tendencies as well as cases which give evidence to the power of advocacy and dialogue. 7, many of these chapters are, from my perspective as a professor, great pedagogical tools for helping students to engage and critically analyze the debates that are swirling around us and, of course, influencing our communities. So with that, with those 7, I'd like to now just read a little bit from my introduction and then a little bit from my conclusion, and then there's a note about the author that I'd like to conclude on. So this is from the intro of my book. Women and Islam, in quotes. It is a subject that is surrounded by strongly held and divergent opinions, values, and beliefs, as well as by misconceptions, overgeneralizations, and yes, political agendas. In the 21st century, there are many competing voices attempting to define who Muslim women are and what their identities and values should be. Many of these protagonists attempt in some way to establish or reinforce a single narrative, a singular story that cannot possibly do justice to the lived experiences and varied aspirations of real women in diverse social contexts. Amid these contending narratives and associated political projects, Muslim women are caught in a web of contradictory isms, from Islamism and secularism to traditionalism, Orientalism, and liberalism, just to name a few. Ideological fragmentation within Muslim societies and even within academic analysis makes the subject of women and Islam intrinsically polarizing and creates a tendency toward reductive and even cliched representations of the multiple challenges and pressures facing Muslim women. These representations colonize our intellectual landscape and fill our heads with preconceptions and images that beg for scholarly critique and engagement. And now I'm going to read a little bit from my conclusion. So that gives you a little about the beginning of the book and a little from the end, and then I'll end about a note about my own self. Zunira Ishaq, Pakistani, Sunni, Muslim, immigrant, defended her right of religious expression by wearing the niqab as she took the oath of citizenship in Ontario, Canada. Bilqis Abdul Qadir, daughter of African American reverts to Islam and an award-winning as well as record-breaking collegiate basketball player, helped to overturn the FIBA hijab ban and fought for the right of hijab-wearing women to play all sports. Irshad Manji, Ugandan-born Canadian journalist and advocate for reform of Islam, wrote a New York Times best-selling book on the trouble with Islam, in which she challenged barriers to progressive thinking. Mahdia Lin, transgender woman and Shia Muslim convert, co-founded Masjid al-Rabi'a in Chicago, Illinois, which is the first trans-led, women-centered, and LGBTQ+ affirming mosque in North America. Ingrid Mattson, a hijab-wearing soccer mom, served from 2001 to 2010 as the vice president and president of the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA, one of the largest Muslim advocacy organizations in North America, during which time she led efforts to foster greater inclusion for women through women-friendly mosques. As this book testifies, there is no single narrative defining the Muslim woman in North America. There is no Muslim woman, in quotes. Rather, there is a multitude of diverse Muslim women living and negotiating a variety of controversies and divisive issues. So now I'm just going to read a note about the author that's at the end of my introduction, and then we can have a Q&A, I hope. In my first singled authored manuscript, Encountering the Transnational, Women, Islam, and the Politics of Interpretation, I wanted to understand how the transnational influenced Muslim women's activism across national borders, as well as their understanding of, I have to read that again. I wanted to understand how the transnational influenced Muslim women's activism across national borders, as well as their understandings of self, other, society, and Islam. In doing so, I also learned more about the transnational and transcultural in me, and that I am not and never will be a product of a monolithic culture or possessor of a single collective identity. Rather, my construction and understanding of selfhood is an assemblage of different nationalities, cultural and religious legacies, as well as political and intellectual landscapes. Naturally, throughout my scholarly career, I have felt at home in the dialogical, in relations with diverse and sometimes contradictory ways of knowing and being. As a product of an author who has also resided in both America and Canada, this book is a continued exploration of the dialogical, but also of identity construction among Muslim women negotiating social controversies and conflicts in the 21st century in North America. In a world of collapsing distances, global pandemics manifest not just through disease pathogens, but also through infectious ideas and attitudes of conflict and contradiction that generate deep suspicion and polarizing controversy, and which have impacted my life as a mother and scholar. In writing about outbreaks of the latter variety, I'm hoping to gesture toward a preventative as well as reparative medicine, and thereby contribute toward the healing of divisive social wounds infected by contagions of Islamophobia, misunderstanding, and distrust. When used in creative ways, words can serve as physicians of the heart and mind, healing divisive modes of thought while acting as a sort of immunization against extreme positions. Ultimately, words have the potential to promote the practice of intellectual hygiene and become the foundation for more peaceful cultural conditions and relations of humanity as a whole. So thank you so much for letting me share a bit from this book that has taken me on a lovely journey and has brought me to you guys today.
I think we can take questions now, Iman.
Yes, thank you so much, Mina. That
Oh,
was so insightful, and your voice is very soothing, mashallah. I really, really enjoyed listening to you.
oh, Iman, I'm just following you.
All right. So if there are any questions, as mentioned earlier, you can put them in the Q&A. And if you would rather speak, you can raise your hand and we can invite you to say your question out loud as well. Okay, I see Nyla has her hand raised. Okay, you can go ahead, Nyla.
Hello, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. I'm really, really inspired by what you just said. My question is, it's amazing how people like you, Muslim scholars who, have so much to offer, so much to say, who are, they just don't get the kind of publicity like all the other women authors who just have that kind of content which uh, stereotype Muslim women, and so there has to be some, and I know that the media highlights because of all the Islamophobia that is there, they do that, but we need to have some kind of a combined strategy how to address these issues. After all, there's just a few of these and we're so many of us, so why can't we, is there anything that we can do as a collective Muslim body or something like that? Do we have any like global women association who can do that? I know you briefly mentioned, but if you could just highlight that a bit more, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, right off the bat, Nyla, I evoke you. Each and every one of us has the amazing I believe, energy to help in any way we can the development of what I call civil society. You know, that to help broaden understanding of the human condition. And so, you know, when you were mentioning how can all of us on this call be more like individuals who are bestsellers? It's a great question. Well, I think that everything that we do, like Iman, you being a moderator right now, that speaks infinitely into the universe. We can't even know how far. Seriously, we can't. So we always have to have hope in that, for one thing. I also do believe that, so there's the individual that has the responsibility to act and to really, you know, act in ways that allow you to see the world that you'd like it to be. I think that's probably why I went into peace and conflict resolution, and why I love the dialogical, is that I do believe that even within great extremes, we as a humanity can go to the next level of imagination if we want to. And so there's that individual, and every individual has their own way of relating to activism and being the social advocate. But of course, individuals come together, and you find, of course, individuals forming groups. I mean, hello, here we are on the platform of CCMW, which is one of the most profound Muslim women advocacy organizations in North America, in the world. What CCMW does for pushing dialogue, the dialogical in the Canadian context, is beautiful. And it's not just CCMW. You know, that's what's so precious. Before everyone got here, Nushat and I were talking about, you know, transnational networks. And it is amazing how there is a lot of beautiful Muslim women networks that also need to be known. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a beautiful question to ask everyone.
Thank you, Mina. I think it's a very important reminder that we all have the power within ourselves to create change, right? To be the advocates that we aim to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another question here from Elizabeth. Are there any conversations or experiences that you had with Professor Said that guided you as you wrote this book?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And everyone on this call, you know, we've all had mentors. And there's so much that he gave. How many of you, I mean, right now, I just say to each and every one of you, just think of a teacher, think of a mentor, think of a soul who has influenced you to be who you are. Influenced you, how you think, how you act. And, you know, the beloved Abdulaziz lived up to his name. Servant of Aziz. I hope you guys don't mind me sharing that. And, you know, he was the founder of the largest international peace and conflict resolution program in America. He brought in 10% of the endowment at American University. He founded the first Islamic peace chair. He founded an Islamic studies chair in connection to the Islamic peace chair. So 2 chairs. And now a 3rd chair has just been founded at American University under his name in peace and conflict resolution. So going back to Naila, think of one individual, what they can do in this world. It's amazing. Yeah. So maybe I'll just say that, you know, Professor, as a teacher, I always say to my students on the first day of class that we all are resources to one another. And that you can, there's a, to think about not the scarcity of what is in the other, but the abundancy. And that whenever you meet anyone, they are a resource, no matter if you disagree, agree, feel a little like, what? There is a resource there. And that's a way of living in the vastness, a way of living, like a mountain, seeing higher above any aspect that might make you feel lower. I hope you don't mind me sharing that.
Not at all. That was beautiful. Thank you. We have another question from Siddiqa. So her question is about your university. Do you feel Islamophobia is prevalent there? I'm from Quebec, and as much as we hear about Islamophobia in Quebec, it really isn't as prevalent when you're here, to be honest.
Yeah. Islamophobia. What a word, eh? Each one of us on this call has our own definition and experience of it. As for myself, I have experienced different Islamophobic moments, meaning that I've experienced Islamophobia on me and my family. And it's interesting, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, that when in the classroom, I almost welcome it, because out of 20 years, it's those moments of great limitation where you can never expect them to happen, because you can never prepare for them in a lecture. But if you're open to seeking the dialogue of the moment, then you're also looking for the diversity of understandings. And so you try that moment to transcend the experience of fear. I remember when I was being interviewed for my job at Wilfrid Laurier, and there were particular individuals in the audience who asked very pointed questions. And I knew that those questions were coming from a position of fear, of not knowing a particular way. And so when you feel that, you need to find a way to broaden the conversation. And I remember in that particular moment, I was asked when I gave a lecture on my fieldwork from my dissertation that was put into my first book, where I was talking about Muslim women's transnational networks. And two individuals from the audience said that it sounds like you're talking about modernizing Islam, that these women are representing a modernization of Islam. And I looked at these individuals and I said, it's brilliant to know that in the academy, people are debating what is modernity itself. That there are scholars that are actually understanding that modernity actually came about the time of the Abbasids. That when the Abbasids had the great house of wisdom, that was a great modern invention at that time. So modernity was in the medieval ages. And it's interesting right there. And I'm looking at Iman. It's like, it's amazing, like that had never been thought about before. Like, what, wait, you're taking something that I thought was not, wait, you know? And so I think that's our job too, when it comes to Islamophobia, is to be grounded in affirmation of your own self and connected once again to a larger way of being. And for those Muslims on the call, you know, it's a direct link to Tawheed and the belief in the unity of everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Again, beautifully said. Okay, we have another question from Dr. Najmi. So it says, thanks for a great talk about your book. I'll definitely read the book. Why are only Muslim women to prove their identity status in North America? Why not Hindu women, Chinese women, and women of other cultures?
Naiman, can you say that one more time?
Yep. So it says, why are only Muslim women to prove their identity status in North America? Why not Hindu women, Chinese women, and women of other cultures?
Well, that's, and I'm sort of like, huh, of course, like, yes. And there's beautiful scholarship, of course, that looks at diverse cultural, religious, beloved women. So I don't know really how to answer your question. I wish I was a scholar of Chinese beloved women. I wish I was a scholar of Hindu women. But there is, of course, for your information, beautiful comparative analysis that's from, and I could I would be happy to send you an email of examples that try to look at the comparative, you know, understanding between Hindu and Muslim, you know, women, and the controversies and challenges and conversations that, of course, are connected to that relationship. Yeah, forgive me for not knowing how else to answer that.
Thank you. And maybe Dr. Najmi, if you'd like to put your email in the chat, maybe, or if Mina, we can share your email, maybe the conversation can move offline. But we have Afua Cooper with their hand up. So Afua, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank our speaker for a really insightful presentation. But the question from our last questioner, well, I don't know how to say it. I think she was asking why Muslim women have to prove their identity in North America. I don't think the question was really answered, because as she asked that question, I thought, well, why Muslim women have to be proving their identity all the time in North America? It's just because of what her speaker spoke about, as imagined by Westerners, this whole clash of civilization. So braided throughout Western theology, Western culture is really like a devastating kind of Islamophobia that dates back from even before the Crusades, but got articulated in a serious way during the Crusades. So in Islam, theoretically, we don't have interest, we don't have usury. Western society is built on capitalism. So right there and then is a sort of hatred for Islam, because if Islam is sort of practiced the way we think it should in terms of those things, then the capitalist system would probably crash. Not gonna happen, because, you know, it's just not gonna happen, or at least not in that way. But my point is, there's such a hatred of Islam in Western society that's braided through, and then the woman's body become the site of contestation. The woman's body is a site of contestation in a way that a man's body is not, a Muslim man's body. One of the things we see is how Islam is presented as this backward religion, this backwards sort of thing, not interested in moving forward. But what's so heartbreaking is that in this moment, in this time, it's that Muslim majority countries are the ones that have been invaded, destroyed. We look at Afghanistan, Libya, as two examples, Somalia, Sudan, invaded, destroyed. And, you know, the Afghani situation produced something like 3 million refugees in Pakistan alone. So here is the West, here is the academia, you know, having their backup about Islam and Muslim women as a site of contestation, when in reality, it's the Western society that have destroyed Muslim societies, Muslim majority societies. You have Muslims now leaving Pakistan, leaving Afghanistan, leaving Sudan, going through the Darien Gap in Central America and walking up to the Mexican border because of what Western societies have done to their countries. So I think the West has played this really nasty, terrible, and dirty game. And you know, one of the big things, if people may recall, was the opening of a Victoria's Secrets shop in Kabul, right? 20 years of war in Afghanistan. So Muslim women in North America and Western society must be constantly proving their identity, or, you know, this whole identity war is played out on our bodies in a way Christian, Hindus, Jewish, Buddhist women do not have to. They don't carry that burden. They don't carry that burden because Western society has juxtaposed itself against Islamic society, culture, and value. So listening to that, I mean, we cannot think about or cannot talk about, you know, this thing about women and Islam without looking at how Islamophobia is braided through Western society, culture, thought, and ideology. We see it every day in the academy. We see just walking on the street, going into superstore or Loblaws to shop. It's everywhere. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Afu. Beautifully stated. You know, it's fascinating living as a Muslim woman in the 21st century in North America. And I say fascinating because, you know, I'm a scholar who's been influenced by relational thinking. And relational thinking is really developed in the 21st century within Western, Eastern, Northern, Southern academies. It's amazing. It's an international conversation about how we construct identity. And what I love about relational thinking is that it really affirms the complexity of who we are. And it tries to avoid the need to polarize, the need to create a bifurcation of the world. And it's hard because, you know, bringing it down to earth, when I pray the Fatiha, and then I go to the secular academy, and I try to remember the Asma al-Husna. And I'm also buying whatever from the supermarket. And it's fascinating. There really is no way to pinpoint where an idea ends or begins. And so I always like to say to my students, you know, if you use paper, and the idea of paper came from China and then developed in different contexts across the world, does that make you Chinese? What if I live in the West, whatever the West may be to the individual's mind? Does that make me Western while I say the Fatiha? And it's a beautiful question for us Muslims. I really do believe it, because going back to the notion of Tawheed. Yeah. The relationship with the world and the cosmos. Yeah. I hope you don't mind. Maybe at this moment I could share with you something that I wrote about complementary contradictions, because it sort of fits in. So, complementary contradictions. And I was inspired because Ibn al-Arabi, every day, he would have particular prayers that he would say. And on Thursday nights and Friday mornings, he would evoke this idea of complementary contraries. So here we go. Integrating the principle and practice of complementary contradictions into one's worldview allows for affirmation and experience of wholeness, even amidst great conflict. I don't need to define myself against them. Even if I find aspects of another worldview misdirected and problematic, I can still be whole and anchor myself beyond the fray. I can still articulate the harm I see while allowing myself to be inwardly free, anchored in Tawheed. And I do feel that it's a beautiful challenge to continue to live and ask for the unification of complementary contraries. How do we unite our complementary contraries? Because the West is within each of us on this call. And Islam is within each of us.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. We have 2 more questions. Hopefully we can go through them quickly, and then I'll send it over to Nina to wrap it up. So first question is from Siddiqa again. She says, thank you so much for your answer. I have another one for you. In your book's title, you mentioned cliche. Would you fit Islamophobia in cliche?
Of course. So a big part of how Islamophobia is being experienced and defined is through cliched representations of Muslim women. And you find those representations throughout a variety of different genres that I talked about, whether it's the clash literature or dissident Muslim women's literature or beyond. That's why, you know, I love alliterations. I love writing. I think I'm a better writer than speaker, but I love writing, and it's just so fun to use alliterations. So that's why controversies, cliches, and conversations came about.
Great. Okay, and then last question is from El Shima. She would like to ask, what prominent story changed your perspective when reading the Quran and its application to modern day lifestyle?
Can you read it one more time?
Yeah. What prominent story changed your perspective when reading the Quran and its application to modern day lifestyle?
That's a beautiful question. That's amazing. Oh, every letter in the Quran is alive. You know, Ibn Arabi talks about how, you know, every word is a being. Every letter is a being. So when you evoke and try to be one with the Quran, and then of course try to remember. All of us are trying to remember constantly. And all of us on this call who have experienced how Zainab started the whole meeting with the Fatiha. Yeah. What is the Fatiha opening? How is a letter, a word like a name of God, a chapter or a verse? How are they beings? You know? I remember when my beloved son, he was like about 3 years old, starting to speak. And we have a prayer room. And in the prayer room, we have the Asma al-Husna in the corner that we direct to. And I'll never forget, he came in one day, pointed, and he goes, "Angels! Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Malik, Ya Qudus, Ya Sad." Angels. Yeah. So to answer your question, if there's a particular story, that is so hard, because the whole Quran. It's beyond the universe and anything that we can ever explain. Hope you don't mind me answering it that way. May you have infinite moments. Great peace.
I mean, thank you so much, Mina. That was beautiful. Thank you for your time and thank you for answering all the questions. I'm going to pass it over to Nina now to wrap up the evening.
Wow, Mina,
Oh,
I'm
Nina.
just, oh my God. Everybody knows I'm a crier. So this might, but may you have infinite moments of peace. Ameen, ameen. I'm the lucky one that gets to say thank you to you. Thank you for being a breath of fresh air with your genuine, peaceful, and gentle nature. I agree with Iman. I could listen to you speak all night. May God continue to give you strength and patience. Highlight peace and intercultural dialogue. To find the ties that connect people and not focus on what separates and divides us. Thank you for bringing in the late Professor Abdulaziz Said, may God bless his soul, into your talk. I had not heard about this amazing man, and I can see how you are continuing his work. I found this quote of his: "Peace is not only an absence of violence, but a presence of justice, a presence of equality, and a presence of cooperation." And I do agree that CCMW is striving in its own, small way to add to those discussions, to that presence of equality and cooperation and justice, and to bring that to as many people as possible, and or just shine a light on it. On that note of cooperation, I'd like to thank the team at CCMW that brought this talk to you tonight. Nusat, Zainab, Iman, Suleika, Sabrine, and baby Mika. You are all amazing, mashallah. And most of all, thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. Your friendship and support is always much appreciated. We're so happy to see old friends and meet new friends here today. Please keep in touch with CCMW and follow us on our website and social media platforms. Watch for our upcoming events and projects. Our Women Who Inspire celebration is taking place in Toronto on Sunday, November the 5th. Tickets are available at early bird pricing now, so please visit our website for details. We'd love you all to spread the word, inshallah, and buy your tickets and be with us in person. It's events like this, Mina, that make me miss being in person. But I do know that if we were in person, we'd have to book a whole day. Lots of food, drink lots of chai.
Yalla ya habibi.
Yeah, inshallah. Anyway, our Women Who Inspire event also raises funds for our Lila Fallman Scholarship. And we'll be awarding scholarships to amazing Muslim women, and we'll learn about their future studies. Until next time, may God protect you and your loved ones and communities. May He put love and mercy between us, and may we always continue to strive in God's way. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you very much.